Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant, or rather the Dynasty Slant this time of year, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with my usual co-host, Russell Clay. Say hello, Russ.
Aloha, everyone.
Russ, long time no see, my friend. It's, like you and I talked about, it's sort of the, I'm not going to say the dead air of the offseason, but there's a lot of space between free agency and the draft, and we're currently in it.
Yeah, there's still a lot of things in terms of dynasty point of view that are solidifying right now, but it is a bit of a dead area in terms of news. I mean, obviously, we just ran through free agency, which was consistent news every day, and that's winding down now. But yeah, I mean, draft in 20 some odd days, so we're getting pumped up for that. But a ways out, so we're finding ways to get through this.
And we will get through it together, my friend. So, all right. So for tonight's show, Russ, I think we'll do the patented news and notes section, where we will look at any of the happenings that's happened the last couple of weeks that we've been off the air, and their dynasty impact, obviously. And then you and I, Russ, are going to have a good old-fashioned Lincoln Douglas-esque type debate over dynasty rankings, and you will tell me where I'm an idiot, and I will tell you where you're an idiot, and who knows, maybe at some point we can be idiots together. So
we'll load our muskets, so every 5 minutes we'll have a take,
Yeah. Oh no, the takes will be scorching for this.
Put the gunpowder in,
No, it'll be pretty rapid fire on that front. So. All right, so without any more delay, Russ, let's just jump right in. I think the biggest news, and again, this just shows you how much news there is in this period, or lack thereof, but C.J. Anderson, who, again, didn't get a lot of coverage because it's C.J. Anderson, but he did re-sign with Denver, Russ. They did have to match the offer that Miami offered him, a 4-year deal, about $18 million. But we're not here necessarily to debate the cap ramifications and the misguided attempt, I guess, to get C.J. Anderson for a tad cheaper. But nonetheless, we will discuss the dynasty impact of said re-signing. So first up, Russ, what does this do for C.J. Anderson's dynasty value now that he'll be in Denver, at least for the foreseeable future for you?
Yeah, I think you're excited for it just because he's not in Miami. I mean, I think that was going to be a muddled situation. The Broncos kind of got caught unprepared here. I mean, a lot of the reports were that they didn't expect this much interest from him from the free agent market. So I think this was an eye-opening moment for them. I don't think they wanted to pay him this much, but them actually matching after all this is a sign that, hey, okay, they do have some type of commitment to him at this point. So even if they were forced into it, obviously, he's got the head up in at least a committee, and hey, might have quite a few games as sort of the lead guy there.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny, all this for a guy who has yet to rush for more than 850 yards in a season yet. But, I mean, nonetheless, cumulatively, the stats may not be eye-opening, but, I mean, he was fairly efficient. I mean, he averaged 4.7 yards a carry in each of his last 2 seasons. Obviously led the team in carries. He had 8 touchdowns 2 years ago, 5 touchdowns last year. And, was okay in the pass game. I mean, nothing, spectacular, but he showed he could, get probably 1 to 2 catches a game on top of that. So a little preview, Russ, where would you rank C.J. Anderson as far as dynasty running backs go heading into this season?
Man, I'd put him between, obviously we have to see where sort of Zeke is going to be ahead of him for me. Derrick Henry's going to be ahead of him for me. But, I mean, probably around 10 to 15, that area, somewhere around there.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's not so much C.J. Anderson that is creating that ranking, but it's just the, I guess, situation / opportunity, Like you alluded to, he is the man in Denver now. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And with the lack of a quarterback solution yet, they're probably going to rely on him a lot. So, yeah, I think more than anything, I'm buying into that opportunity more than anything,
Right.
So, but speaking of the quarterback situation in Denver, Russ, Swing and a miss on Colin Kaepernick. He surprisingly would not take a pay cut, and the 49ers surprisingly would not pay Denver to have him. So no Colin Kaepernick in Denver. Mark Sanchez still atop the depth chart there, Russ. So let's face it, they have to do something with that position, right, for this year and beyond.
You would think so, at least in terms of drafting a developmental quarterback. There's quite a few in this incoming class. So, I mean, especially in the second, third, fourth round of this draft, there's at least 3 to 4 that come to mind pretty quickly in terms of developmental guys. So that's probably what they're looking at there. I can't see them making a big splash move in the first, but I guess there's 2 to 3 guys: Paxton Lynch, Jared Goff, and then Carson Wentz. So if one of those guys is sort of there and they can move up or something, I guess I wouldn't be too shocked for that either.
Yeah, and I think you and I might get into that in the next episode, which will be on the doorstep of the draft. But yeah, I mean, like you said, it's very possible none of those guys is there for Denver at the end of the first, let alone anywhere later. So yeah, it'll be interesting. Speaking of Colin Kaepernick, he doesn't end up in Denver, obviously. He is staying, at least momentarily, in San Francisco. Russ, it's his career has just been, peak after a valley after a peak after a valley. So I don't know. What do you even make of this? I don't even know how to start with his dynasty value.
Well, first of all, pour one out for the Blaine Gabbert truthers. You'll have to wait one more year for supremacy.
Hey, he's not bad as a backup. Okay.
No,
he will not win a Super Bowl, but look, is he competent enough to play for a doormat and keep the offense moving along half the time? Sure, I think so.
He was actually relatively solid last year, so backup quarterback status solid. But anyway, Kaepernick, I think he needs a solid situation around him to thrive. I think we have enough of a sample size at this point to see he's not gonna sort of be that dominant guy he was under Harbaugh, in these volatile situations. So the pieces aren't necessarily there. Obviously, you'd like Hyde more if Kaepernick was there, sort of running the read option every once in a while. But, I mean, other than that, it's pretty doom and gloom unless they go wide receiver in the first tier.
So, back on that, Russ, what, in your opinion, made Kaepernick so successful under Harbaugh? I mean, what are they missing now that they didn't have? Is it offensive line? Is it Frank Gore? Is it? I mean, what can they possibly do, or what could any team do to surround Colin Kaepernick with the pieces that would make him successful?
Well, I have a lot of respect for Harbaugh as a coach, number one. I think he coaches players up to make them better than they are. They had an elite defense throughout his few years there. And then I don't necessarily think Gore to Hyde. I mean, Gore was later on in his career. I think Hyde can sort of replicate that type of player, but it's just not the same situation, and it's not going to be, even if they get a good head coach in there. It's just the roster isn't that great anymore, Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, I still think Kaepernick can be a starter, but I don't think we're going to see sort of the high end upside that we saw with Harbaugh.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I'm a diehard 49er fan, but I really think he probably could have done well if he went to Denver. I think the pieces were there. At least they're a lot further along, obviously, than they are in San Francisco. And they've got some elements that even they didn't have, under Harbaugh. They've got Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders to throw to. So, he's got some guys that could bail him out if they had to. So, dynasty ranking for Colin Kaepernick, Russ, is it even worth diving in?
He's in that mishmash of 20 to 30 range where there's some upside, sort of like RG3 too, where there's just so much up in the air right now. You kind of need to see training camp and how that goes. I definitely take a shot on him late in dynasty drafts, especially in super flex leagues or 2 QB leagues. But yeah, you're not relying on him right now, or you're in trouble.
Right, right. That's our advice to everyone if they didn't know about it. All right, so our last news and note, Russ, kind of a peculiar situation. So Brashad Perriman drafted last year by Baltimore, didn't play his entire rookie season with several lower leg injuries. Now we hear, and you know, you and I think even talked about this in this offseason, that he was a perfect buy low candidate because he, you know, was flying under the radar. You've got another class full of rookie receivers coming in that's just going to push him down the list. But now there's word just yesterday he's still not running fully, not just like practicing fully, like he's not even running fully. So with that news, Russ, is it, you know, are the red flags going back up for Perriman?
Yeah, I think initially you look at him, not necessarily in that Kevin White tier of just, it was a lost season. He's going to be healthy this year, sort of just buy low because you can. But not only is this injury stuff compounding with his ADP, but I mean, they signed Mike Wallace, which while it's not a great signing, it's still maybe they're a little more worried than where the general consensus are thinking right now. So you're still paying a premium for Brashad Perriman right now in the startup draft. And I don't feel comfortable with that until I see him being 100%, sort of like what we saw with Kevin White, the GM coming out saying he's 100%. I need to see something like that to feel comfortable buying him now. Because, man, we've seen quite a bit in the recent history, the last 5 years or so. Sometimes there is fire with some of this injury smoke, you know? We saw it with David Wilson, stuff like that, where something like you don't necessarily take seriously can turn into something big.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, you hit the nail on the head. You know, they signed Mike Wallace seemingly out of nowhere, but look, it sounds like they knew something we didn't know at the time, which is Perriman is not fully healthy again. So they you know, probably signed Wallace as a bit of insurance. But yeah, it's just starting to get a little, like you said, disconcerting that he's still not practicing or running fully. And look, it's going to be training camp before we know it. And if he's still not cleared to go or still not running at full strength or at full speed, I mean, look, that's his game. So if he doesn't have that, it's going to be very dicey. So I think we're on the same page there. Be cautious if somebody tempts you with a Brashad Perriman deal. Just think twice before you hit accept on that one. But all right, Russ. So without further ado, which I've been saying all night, we have some updated Dynasty rankings, courtesy of Pro Football Focus, that you and I are going to go through. You can get it on the members only side, so you do have to log in. But for this episode, Russ, we're going to give folks a sneak peek of what we're talking about. So let's just go in order of position and quarterbacks. Just to give people a quick rundown, what my current top five is in order: Andrew Luck, 1, Aaron Rodgers, 2, Russell Wilson, 3, Ben Roethlisberger, 4, and Cam Newton, 5. So Russ, do your worst.
I would swap Newton and Wilson. Actually, I would probably put Ben at 5, Wilson at 4, Cam at 3. But I mean, in terms of the next 2 years, sort of looking at that range, those are obviously the top 5 in terms of upside. You're looking at guys who, on a per game basis, the past few years are just high upside, all of them. And even with Rodgers sort of degrading situation last year, he was still 30 plus touchdowns and a pretty reasonable quarterback 1. So, I mean, Luck, he was actually pretty serviceable when he was in last year. So I don't mind any of those. I don't have a problem with any of that. I would just move Cam up just because of his rushing upside and floor.
Yeah, well, and you know, and I know people will see that, meaning Russell Wilson 3 and Cam Newton 5, and wonder about that. I guess my reasoning is, and you sort of touched on it with Rodgers, being a, you know, quote, traditional pocket passer, I think has a lot more longevity as far as fantasy production goes than being a runner, right? I mean, there's no doubt, you can't doubt Cam Newton's rushing ability. It's unprecedented what he's doing. But it just concerns me that if that's what you're banking on as far as, you know, I guess keeping up that kind of rushing production, that's the part that scares me, as opposed to a guy like Wilson, who look, I don't think anyone saw that last year where he threw for 4,000 yards and 30-something touchdowns. Nobody saw that coming. And to me, it's almost like, he's transitioned successfully to that, and they might, go more that route next year because Marshawn Lynch is retired. They've got Thomas Rawls and Kristen Michael, but I just see them, I guess, putting the ball more in Wilson's hands as far as passing goes than rushing, and I would take that over Newton's rushing ability, at least, long term. I mean, next year, obviously it's a toss-up, but long term, I just think Wilson's game currently translates longer than, say, Newton's does.
Yeah, and I think the way Russell Wilson makes all of his receivers super efficient. I mean, if you look at the per targets for sort of Doug Baldwin, Jermaine Kearse, you go down the line. He just makes all of his receiving options very efficient, and that's very Rodgers-esque. And I don't know what Russell Wilson's ceiling is at this point, so I have no problems with putting him over Cam. Personally, for me, I'd have Cam, but I think it's a real toss-up, and I think they're closer to Rodgers than we would have thought 6 months ago.
And I'd agree with that wholeheartedly. Not only is the age difference a big factor, but yeah, it's just they looked better last year anyway than Aaron Rodgers did. And again, it remains to be seen if it was all Aaron Rodgers or it was just lack of competent receivers around him. But yeah, I agree with you. I think the gap has definitely closed a lot after last season. So
definitely.
All right. So the next batch, Russ. So I have number 6. Jameis Winston, number 7, Marcus Mariota, number 8, Blake Bortles, number 9, Matt Ryan, and number 10, Ryan Tannehill. So again, Russ, where did I go wrong? Tell me.
I think the one that piques the most interest here is definitely Matt Ryan. Coming off a weaker year, but I'm hoping they get a wide receiver in the first few rounds there to sort of go opposite of Julio. I know they got Mohamed Sanu, which I don't mind, but I'd like him as a third receiver instead of a second. So if they can get something like that, I'd like him, but I just don't see the ceiling there, I guess, game to game for me, especially in head-to-head leagues. And I just want to say in general on this tier, I'm fading this entire tier. I just think you can wait. Obviously, you have to rank them like this, and I do like Winston and Mariota in terms of future upside, but they're not players I'm targeting because, especially in startups, I think you see a lot of upside guys going in the same range at running back, wide receiver, and tight end, and that's just where I'd want to make my move at that stage of drafts.
Yeah, and first I will tell you I completely agree as far as the tiers go. I think after the top 5, it's a crapshoot. It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, any guy that's at 6 could be just as good as the guy at 15, hypothetically. With Matt Ryan, though, I mean, there's no doubt he had a down year. He threw for 21 touchdowns, his lowest total since his rookie year. So that's how bad it was. I don't know. At least right now, I'm considering that a fluke, I guess, meaning I'm hopeful that, with Roddy White out of the picture now, and like you said, hopefully they address the receiver position more than just the Mohamed Sanu sighting. I'm hopeful that, he could keep utilizing Julio, obviously, for his prime. You've got Freeman now, who I think has proved to be a pretty valuable asset in the running game and the passing game. And look, compared to some of the guys that are going to be after Ryan that we're going to look at, being 30 years old is still relatively young. You know what I'm saying? So I guess, I just may have a soft spot for him. And look, there's no doubt I am one of the more conservative dynasty players, meaning I am much more comfortable going on prior track record with a veteran than the upside. And sure, does it cost you? Absolutely it does, because you miss out on some very good guys ahead of them busting out. But at the same time, until Matt Ryan has another down year, I think I'm assuming that last year was a fluke.
Yeah, I think we look at sort of Phillip Rivers from a few years ago, or Eli Manning, or even Joe Flacco last year as guys. They're fine. They're not going anywhere. They're going to be with their teams for at least the next 3 to 5 years. So in terms of dynasty, especially Superflex and stuff. Like those guys are all really safe, really high floor for the next few years.
Right, right. I think that's the perfect way to put that. So, all right, Russ. So let's do the next 10, okay? And then you let me know where I went astray. So, number 11, Derek Carr. Number 12, Tom Brady. Number 13, Matt Stafford. Number 14, Phillip Rivers. Number 15, Jay Cutler. Number 16, Drew Brees. Number 17, Tony Romo. Number 18, Eli Manning. Yeah. Number 19. Oh, wow. Number 19, I have. Oh, there he is, Kirk Cousins. See, I didn't even see Kirk Cousins there. And number 20, Andy Dalton. So,
yeah.
Is there anyone, let's put it this way, is there anyone missing out of that tier that I didn't include? But look, as you noted, that's sort of quarterback 2 territory now, that 11 through 20 overall ranking.
And man, it just extends. So like this tier is just so big right now. And I mean, if you're playing MFL 10s right now, I actually just entered my first one the other day, but it's like, you can just wait so long. I mean, you look at Tyrod Taylor, he's going to have another year. Who knows how he's pretty much a high risk player, but in terms of what he provided last year, he's got a pretty reasonably high ceiling per week for head-to-head leagues. Carson Palmer's getting up there and obviously has injury red flags, but that's an interesting guy as well. And I mean, I look at a guy like Alex Smith, and while I don't think he belongs in front of any of the guys you mentioned, I think again for those super flex 2 quarterback leagues, he's a very viable option just because of the guys around him.
Yeah, and I was going to say the exact same thing. You've got Travis Kelce, who's a beast now. You've got Jeremy Maclin, who appears to be the first competent receiver in Kansas City in a very long time. So, I'd agree with that. And like you said, the tier is just so loaded. It's kind of like, why even bother to draft a second one if you're saying a 2 quarterback league early?
Right. Yeah, and then sort of Brady, Brees, Romo, Eli, like all those guys have nice upside. They're older, so their price is suppressed. But yeah, I really like that tier, and that's where I like to attack.
All right, Russ. So we won't bore folks with the details of the rankings after that as far as quarterbacks go, but look through it real quick. Anything that sticks out for you that you think I was high when I did
that? No, I think you pretty much kept it pretty efficient. Again, the Griffin Kaepernick grouping has some upside to me, a little maybe more than is generally perceived right now.
Yeah, because I currently have Griffin at 29 and Kaepernick at 30. So you said you might bump them up a little higher than that.
Yeah, a little bit. I do think sort of Kaepernick still has that unlocked rushing potential if a coach can figure it out. But overall, yeah, you don't want to put them in front of too many of these guys here because they're solidified roles.
Right. All right. So we'll say, in your opinion, I passed the quarterback. So let's move on to the next position, Russ. Running backs, which is always a crapshoot. I'll just do top 5 first. 1, Todd Gurley. I mean, if you look at the other rankers, it's a consensus there. Number 2, Le'Veon Bell, same thing. Number 3, David Johnson out of Arizona. Number 4, Devontae Freeman. And number 5, Lamar Miller. So, top 5, Russ. Is that all right?
Big thumbs up. Same order for me. I might swap Miller and Freeman, but I think that's pretty negligible at this point. The only concern I have here a little bit is Le'Veon Bell. I mean, I just want to see him healthy on the field. Obviously, he's my number 2 in terms of dynasty running backs. When Zeke gets into the picture, I think that's going to make things interesting, but upside's huge. He's still young. Love the offense. So there's tons of positive indicators. That was just a really gruesome injury. I mean, that if you go back in Game Pass and watch that injury, it was really bad. I have faith in modern medicine to figure it out, but that was a scary injury. So
it was. And look, there's no doubt that should be a concern for folks, because it's not like Le'Veon Bell, is this was an anomaly. He's been injured before, so but I go back to there's just, and as there's just not that many guys that are workhorses now that are going to get the attention it deserves to be a top running back, especially in dynasty leagues. I mean, these rankings could be completely upside down next year, depending on situations. So, I think I agree with you there. All right, so 6 through 10, I've got Carlos Hyde, Doug Martin, Mark Ingram, TJ Yeldon, and CJ Anderson at number 10. By far, amongst the rankers, the highest ranked. So, where did I go wrong, Russ?
Again, I think this is what we're looking at here for the dynasty running back landscape. And again, I'm still hopping on this 2015 running back train. I think we're going to see some positive regression in terms of player roles and sort of these guys getting a little more comfortable in year 2 with how it works to be an NFL running back. But yeah, for now, I think Ingram solidified, Hyde, Martin, those are the guys you want to look at. And I think they're in solidified roles. They've at least in small spurts have shown strong ability. And I think they're the guys you have to look at if you're going running back there right now.
Yeah. And it's really interesting the drop off that starts to happen, because same thing with quarterbacks. You have maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 guys that you can count on, but after that, who knows? So, all right. So 11 through 20, Russ. I'll go through these in order: Thomas Rawls, LaShawn McCoy, Eddie Lacy, Amir Abdullah, Giovanni Bernard, Melvin Gordon, Adrian Peterson, Jamal Charles, Jeremy Hill, Latavius Murray to round out. Now, this is where it could get super squirrely, Russ. So enlighten me.
Yeah. Eddie Lacy, I love at that value. If you can get him at running back 13 in a dynasty startup, I love that right now. I would have him ahead of Rawls and ahead of CJ Anderson. But yeah, again, Yeldon, Abdullah, Melvin. I just don't see how one of those players doesn't emerge into a big sort of fantasy contributor this year. And while I don't think we can pin down exactly who it is right now, I think getting groups of those 2015 running backs is a really smart way to do things right now. In terms of Adrian Peterson and Jamal Charles,
Jumping ship.
I'm more comfortable with Jamal Charles right now, I think, but yeah, it's just tough to trust. He's got some injury red flags. I think Adrian Peterson, while his numbers and season end total numbers were good last year, I think he is slowing down a little bit. He's not sort of the freak of nature that he was early on in his career anymore. So I think we might see Jerick McKinnon eat into some of his sort of snaps this year. And then Gio Bernard and Jeremy Hill, I like both. I think losing Hugh is kind of a big deal. It'll be interesting to see who they go with. I do think both are talented young backs, but is there enough to go around depending on how the new system goes?
Yeah, and that's completely fair. And, it's kind of funny. You do these rankings based on, I think, best case scenario, and it's just interesting to see, or we're going to see what the best case scenario is for those two guys, because it literally could go either way.
Yeah.
They've shown a willingness to work with both of them. So, all right. So the next 10, Russ, real quick in order: DeMarco Murray at 21, Dion Lewis 22, Carlos Williams 23 out of Buffalo, Jonathan Stewart, Jeremy Langford, Duke Johnson, Matthew Jones, Jerick McKinnon at 28, Ryan Matthews at 29, and Matt Forte rounding it out at 30. So, what is completely off from those 10, Russ?
No, I actually do like that grouping, the way you ranked them. I am just not touching that tier, other than Duke Johnson, I think.
So you agree that's where they belong. You're just having nothing to do with them.
Right. No, I agree that that's the correct order. But I think when you get to that spot, I'm looking more towards higher higher upside tight ends. Maybe you're looking at your quarterback 1 in that range, or you're looking at some higher upside wide receivers. I just I'm having a bit of trouble beyond Duke Johnson seeing a strong upside here. I do like McKinnon, but again, who knows how the Vikings are going to handle Adrian Peterson.
Well, yeah, and who knows how long Adrian Peterson's going to decide to be Adrian Peterson.
Right. So it could be 2 more years, and then if you're drafting McKinnon right now, it's really not a thing unless Peterson gets hurt. So
right. All right, Russ. You know, as I was telling you offline, there's about 50 more running backs ranked after that. So we won't name all of them, but real quick, looking through that list, what are some of the things that stick out to you as, hey, that's pretty good value there, or hey, that, you know, is way too high for that guy?
Yeah, I still like Tevin Coleman a lot. I think that's going to be more of a committee in terms of rushing touches this year. Obviously, Freeman's got all the receiving work, and I don't want to see Tevin Coleman catching passes out of the backfield if last year's any indication.
Right.
But
so Coleman at 33, you're okay with?
Yeah, no, I like that value there. I'm looking at some of these handcuffs that I think could be interesting. Again, we're looking at Danny Woodhead. I mean, depending if you have Melvin, I think you want to grab him just for safekeeping, because again, you invested a lot in Melvin and you're still investing a decent amount in him this year. You might as well grab that backup who's going to get those PPR points if Melvin struggles.
Yeah, so 45 you think is okay. You know, and it's tricky because there's definitely obviously some backs that are worth way more in PPR leagues than not. You know, like a guy like Dion Lewis, who I have at, let's see, 22. I think you can make an argument. I mean, and given these rankings are based on non-PPR leagues, because that's more common, but for some PPR leagues, Dion Lewis is probably a top 15 dynasty back, right?
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how the Patriots handle him. But I mean, if he slots back into that role he had last year, and I don't see why he wouldn't. Nice little upside there.
Yeah, they re-signed him, and you know, I don't think any of the running backs that took over for him after that showed that, you know, they're the superior player. It's not like James White, you know, set the world on fire replacing Dion Lewis last year. You know, so. All right, so very good. So that is Dynasty running back rankings, Russ. Let's move on to receiver, which, you know, I think we can all agree is probably the most populous position as far as quality fantasy players go, which, you know, makes it obviously more difficult because the stakes are a lot higher. If you miss on one of these guys, then it's a big drop-off. So, all right, so 1 through 5 for me, Odell Beckham, number 1. I have Antonio Brown number 2 still. I have a soft spot for Antonio. DeAndre Hopkins at number 3, and Julio Jones number 4, followed by Allen Robinson at number 5. So, Russ, where did I get those wrong?
It's all preference right now. I mean, again, I've said this many times. We're in the wide receiver golden age right now, and truly, I'd say 1 through 6 of your rankings, and we'll throw Des Bryant in there as your number 6. I think all those guys have potential to be the number 1 wide receiver this year, and I think you could go all the way down to sort of 11 or 12 as guys who have the potential to be top 3 this year, and that means 1,400 yards and 10 plus touchdowns. So, I mean, it's all preference. I think when you're looking at Julio and Antonio Brown, I think they hit their apex this year. I don't think we're going to see them getting 1,800 yards, 1,800 receiving yards again. But, I mean, if they get you 1,500 and 9 or 10 touchdowns, I mean, that's the same. You know, it's still high-end wide receiver 1 production, and I think you can expect that for the next 2 to 3 years. So it's all preference, you know.
Yeah, and especially if you're in a PPR league and Antonio Brown keeps, you know, getting 136 catches, 129, 110. I mean, you know, that's sort of, I think, what I'm looking at. And again, these are based on non-PPR, but Antonio Brown, man, I mean, it's just amazing what he's been doing, not just in a single season, but just the last couple years. You know, I mean, You would know better than I. I'd have to see if there's been any more productive 2 or 3 year stretch from a receiver than Antonio Brown has done the last couple of years.
It would be tough because, I mean, I'd say for each of the last 3 years, we sort of said, oh, well, yeah, that's sort of his ceiling. Oh, well,
Right.
yeah, that's sort of his ceiling. And then last year happened, and we're like, all right, we don't know, Antonio. We don't know what your ceiling is. But yeah, I mean, if this isn't the ceiling, then it's got to be close, you know?
You never know, man. I mean, look, Roethlisberger missed a couple games last year, and it was apparent. So you never know. But yeah, I'm going with Antonio Brown. Look, it's one of those things that until he proves me wrong, I'm going to keep riding that train as long as I can. So.
I do think there is a slight hint of roster construction sort of taken into account here. I think you might like Hopkins versus Antonio Brown. I think you might go Hopkins just because of the age if you're going with a younger sort of roster construction. But I mean, it's really nicking pits, picking nits, you know, that whole
all of the above.
Yeah.
All right. So 6 through 10, you had mentioned Des Bryant. Number 7, Mike Evans. Number 8, Amari Cooper. Number 9, Sammy Watkins. And number 10, Keenan Allen. So, and like you said, you could go to probably 12 or 13, Russ, and still get quality. But as far as 6 through 10, does that look about right to you?
Oh, my God. I just can't believe there's this many good wide receivers. Yeah. And that's what you're seeing in startups now. You get to 1-8, 1-9, and you're like, wow, I can still get Sammy Watkins.
I was going to say, you're still drafting receivers.
I can still get Amari Cooper. Wow. Early second round, I can still get Keenan Allen or an AJ Green. So, I mean, I love all these guys. I think they're all ascending talents, and if you can even look at these guys at sort of the 1-2 turn or something like that, and maybe luck out and get both. Yeah, I like all those guys. Mike Evans is the big talking point here. I think there's a lot of people that would sort of disagree with that ranking just because of the drops or whatever last year, the inefficiency on targets.
Sure.
But I think one of the bigger things I've learned over the last year is targets in itself are a positive indicator. And you don't want to break down production too much sometimes. So he's got 2,200 receiving yards over his first 2 seasons. So that's pretty darn.
Well, and him and Winston are locked in. I mean, that is the future there. They're going to be together for a while, you know. Keenan Allen, you know, I will say I did not used to be as high on him. I really didn't. I thought it was just a fluky, you know, thing in that rookie year with 1,000 yards. But last year, man, I mean, he came I'm not going to say he came out of nowhere, but he completely blew the doors off of his production through 8 games, half the season. 67 catches for 725 yards and 4 touchdowns. So if he would have played all 16 games, Russ, and extrapolated those numbers, you're looking at 130 catches and 1,500 yards.
Yeah,
it was pretty good.
It wasn't quite what DeAndre Hopkins was doing, but it was right in that same sort of tier, and that's elite production in the first half of the season. So yeah, he was tremendous.
And he's still, care to guess how old he is right now today, Russ? He's been in the league 3 years. Guess how old he is?
I know he came in young. I'd say 24.
He's 23 right now.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Now, he'll turn 24 before the season starts, but today, as of today, he's 23, which is incredible. I mean, that's if you're in a dynasty startup or even a current dynasty league, I think I'd be targeting him as sort of an under-the-radar pick.
Right, no kidding. To get that type of sample size already from a 23-year-old type player, right. That's a nice little luxury.
Let's put it this way. I'm pretty sure he's younger than Josh Dotson. So, yeah, I mean, that's just incredible. So, all right, so the next sort of tier that I have in order, AJ Green, Alshon Jeffrey, Brandon Cooks, Demaryius Thomas, T.Y. Hilton at 15, Devontae Parker, Josh Gordon, Michael Floyd, Dorial Green-Beckham, and then Jordan Matthews. So, Russ, I know I was a big outlier on some guys compared to the other rankers, but where do you see some landmines there?
Again, no landmines at the top of that heap, AJ Green, Alshon, and Cooks. I love Brendan Cooks. I went back and watched a lot of his 2015 season, and as someone who struggled early on in the year, I mean, they really opened him up, and once he started running deeper routes, he really broke out. So I expect that to continue. I mean, 1,200 yards this year. That's sort of what I see for him in that range of outcomes. And then Alshon, obviously, he's done it before. AJ Green is a stud, and he's just a little older than the rest, so justifiable why he's down there. But then things get a little interesting.
Things get weird, Russ. Things get weird.
Demaryius Thomas. Obviously, he's had an elite career, and in the last 4 or 5 years have been tremendous. If this were 2009, and again, I go back to this quite a bit now, it was a much different wide receiver landscape. All right, Wrangler, come on.
The dog disagrees with you, Russ.
He's not happy with the Demaryius ranking. But I just think when you look at the quality of receivers that are there now versus how it was 6-7 years ago, you can't look at it the same way now. When it was just Andre Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald, and Calvin Johnson, and that was it. It's not
Right.
that way anymore. There's like 15 to 20 guys, and there's like 3 to 4 first-round wide receivers coming in every year that are like studly. So it's not the same way as it was 5 years ago. And I mean, 1,100, 1,200 yards isn't what it was a few years ago. So what are we expecting from Demaryius with this sort of volatile quarterback situation? That's how I'm looking at it. He's getting older. So while I do like him for the next few years, it's tough for me to put him over any of these younger guys. And then you look at Devontae Parker. No, I wouldn't take him over Demaryius, but I think if you're high on him and your draft eval was high on him last year, I don't have a problem with you taking a shot there. I wouldn't do it, but if you were high on him last year, there's no reason to sort of be afraid of that now, you know?
Right. So one more question on this grouping, Russ. I personally have Josh Gordon at 17. As you can see from our other rankers, it is all over the map as far as where his dynasty value is perceived. So what about you? Where are you slotting him as far as dynasty rankings go? And we should say, as of this moment, he's not reinstated. So if you're looking at the status quo, he's not playing yet. But assuming he does, where are you putting him?
I'm not touching him. And it
He's
sounds
that radioactive for you.
It sounds funny to say that he's off my board like I'm some type of NFL team drafting, but I would just rather someone else take the risk and potentially hit that jackpot, because that is there. I just worry he's been out of the league for a few years now. Obviously, he's a superb talent and elitely talented when in the right situation or even a bad situation. But him and Martavis and those types of guys that get suspended, I got burned hard with Justin Blackmon a few years ago, and it seems to be a consistent theme of they're just pretty relentless with these guys that get in trouble for drugs. So I understand, again, one of those things where I understand it and why you would do it and the logic behind it. But personally, for me, I'm not going for it.
Yeah. Well, you touched on, I think, an important piece, which is we have some history here to look back on with Justin Blackmon, who at the time, I mean, he was a top 10 dynasty receiver when he came into the league.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, drafted top 5 by Jacksonville, and then, just never was able to get his full potential because of the suspensions and all that kind of stuff. And you're right. Until I think a guy that's been suspended long term can prove that he can come back and can be productive, I can't blame you for not wanting to touch it. It's a very dicey proposition. So, all right. So the next set, Russ, of receivers, and then we'll move on to tight ends. Jarvis Landry at 21, Kelvin Benjamin, Julian Edelman, Jeremy Maclin, Brandon Marshall, Jordy Nelson, Kevin White, Randall Cobb, Martavis Bryant checking in at 29, and John Brown rounding it out at 30. So, and a lot of these guys, Russ, correct me if I'm wrong, it's open to interpretation on how much, how highly they're ranked.
This is where it's sort of the Rorschach test of the
Right.
dynasty world. Everyone's seeing different things with this group, and I
Right.
mean, respectively. So Kelvin Benjamin's a big guy. Where not literal. I mean, he is literally big, but in terms of talking points, major injury was that pure wide receiver one in that offense 2 years ago, but a lot of things have changed. He should slot right back in there, but I think there's some doubt in terms of his skills, and how they're going to go moving forward, and if they draft another receiver, how that's going to work out. Um, I like Macklin. I think he's underrated right now in Dynasty. I like this ranking, but I think he's sort of going a little lower than that. I look at Kevin White. I really like him because I really liked him last year coming out. He's not necessarily a value, but again, like Parker, if you liked him coming out and you were highly rating him last year, I see no reason to sort of not trust your eval and abandon ship on that right now. So, and again, in terms of roster construction, if you're going young, that's definitely a guy I would put a spotlight on in that third or fourth round of a startup. Randall Cobb, I don't know. That was a really bizarre year
I,
from him.
I was gonna
And
bring this up, Russ. I don't understand how,
mm-mm,
like, I have him at 28, right?
mm-hmm,
Personally, our other rankers have him at 15, 17, and 19.
yeah,
I don't get it. What am I missing?
he had that
He had a
really.
great right. He had a great year in 2014, his contract year, 91 catches, 1,287 yards, 12 touchdowns. That's fantastic. And if you had him that year, you probably did very well. But last year, also played 16 games, 79 catches, 829 yards, and 6 touchdowns. His average, his yards per catch average dropped from 14 to 10 and a half overnight. I don't get it. What
And
am I missing?
he's been one of the younger players in Dynasty for the last few years. So I believe
I
he's
mean, I could not trust him, Russ. If you had, like, currently, I would have him outside my wide receiver 2 rankings, hypothetically, right?
right.
Which I think is fair. Because last year, care to guess how many games he had over 100 receiving yards?
Oh boy, not a lot. One
No,
maybe.
you're right. One.
Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
one.
I,
And I don't get it. And again, you could argue that, Jordy Nelson coming back may help out. If Jeff Janis turns into a thing, that may, take some pressure off. But I don't get it, man. I mean, I don't understand it. I
Jeff
would gladly sell Randall Cobb if I had him right now.
Jordy Nelson is another intriguing one where coming off a major injury, plus he's aged. He's going to be age 31 by the season. Um, Obviously, I love Aaron Rodgers, and for the same reason, I'm still willing to give Randall Cobb another shot. I'm willing to give Jordy another shot, but it seems like a lot of people are just plugging him back into that. Oh, he's going to get 1,310. Um,
Right?
I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I mean, we've seen the Brandon Marshalls and Larry Fitzgeralds emerge recently in their mid 30s, but we've also seen Roddy White, who just disappeared. We saw Calvin Johnson retire, so it's not all rose colored glasses from my view on these age 30 plus receivers. So
And that's fair. And believe me, I completely get the concern over Nelson, whether it's the age or coming off the very serious knee injury. But a guy like Cobb, I mean, there was just no rhyme or reason for him to drop off like that.
right, and Devonte Adams got most of the flack for letting down Rodgers, but I think one of the really underrated storylines was how much Cobb sort of failed in that number one receiver role.
Yeah, which like you said, when Nelson went down, I think a lot of there were very high expectations for Cobb to
Yeah.
sort of cut into even more of Jordy Nelson's production, but he actually got a lot less. So,
Mhm.
all right, Russ, past 30, you can take a quick look. Anything that sticks out for you is either spot on or incredibly nuts.
Um, Again, Martavis at 29. I'm fading that, but I get it. Um, I just look at this. Golden Tate, Doug Baldwin, Tyler Lockett type tier, Emmanuel Sanders. I like all those guys. I think Fitzgerald has a few years left just based on his game and sort of he's been able to stay healthy. Deshaun Jackson is another guy. I just really like that tier. I don't think we should be giving up on Nelson Aguilar yet. I just really like that tier from sort of 32 to 45 is where you have them about ranked. I really like that group.
Well, yeah, I mean, because look, if you stretch it out, you're looking at your wide receiver 3, 4s, and 5s in some cases. And like you said, any one of those guys that fills that spot, I think is a great value because there's going to be some games that they have very, very good production. I mean, they're still the number 1 or 2 target on their teams and probably will be for a couple years. And that's what you're looking for. That's half the battle is just opportunity.
Right.
All right, Russ. So let's round out this week's Dynasty rankings discussion with some tight ends. My top 5 in order: Rob Gronkowski. That's a no-brainer. Travis Kelce, Jordan Reed, Greg Olsen, and Tyler Eifert. So, where did I go wrong or right, Russ?
I have Zach Ertz sort of sneaking up in there, but I'd say he's not necessarily in front of any of those guys. So I'm okay with that top 4. Obviously Gronk 1. I'd probably have him in a different order, but yeah, I mean Jordan Reed, he was an absolute stud last year. And other than the concussions, there's no real reason to sort of keep him out of your top 3 dynasty tight ends right now.
Well, yeah, and again, and it's sad that it's part of the game that you got to consider it. But as far as Jordan Reed goes, like you said, I mean, concussions are part of his deal. But despite that, he still had an awesome year. I mean, he had that great rookie year where he just burst on the scene and then got knocked out for a long time. And it's been a couple of years since then, but he finally put it together in 2015. 87 catches, 952 yards, and 11 touchdowns in 14 games. He had 2 games to spare.
Right.
I'm really liking that. I mean, I could totally see if you wanted to go with him over Travis Kelce. I really could.
Yeah.
Because it's pretty apparent that Washington, anyway, does put a premium on that. Not that Travis Kelce hadn't done well and produced, but I think I trust my tight end production more to Jay Gruden / Kirk Cousins than Andy Reid / Alex Smith. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I looked at sort of tight ends who got above 800 receiving yards since 2000 about a week ago. And the trajectory of sort of tight ends becoming prominent players in NFL offenses it's just going up, 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 up. I mean, in 2001, 2002, there was 1 or 2 every year, and now there's 6, 7, 8 in the past few years. So you're sort of looking at the offensive coordinators willing to give these guys the reins of offenses now. So I expect that trend to continue.
Yeah. All right. The next tier, Russ, which is really the fun part. So number 6, I have Jimmy Graham, Ladarius Green at number 7, Zach Ertz at number 8, Eric Ebron at number 9, and Kobe Fleener, of all people, at number 10. So, which, believe me, I can't believe it myself. But, between the giant contract they gave him and that offense, it just seems like a perfect storm of things this year. So anyway, whether it's 6 or 10, what do you like? What do you not like about that tier?
We're gonna disagree on Jimmy Graham. I think that's a tough injury.
Completely fair.
I think that's a tough injury to get over. Obviously, if he can get back on the field, I like him and Russell Wilson. He actually produced pretty well last year for when he was in. Wasn't quite Jimmy Graham in New Orleans numbers, but he was pretty good.
And I was going to say, the reason why I got him that high personally is obviously his track record. He can do it. But, the Seattle passing game really ascended towards the last half of the season and without Jimmy Graham for most of it. So I think I'm looking at it as, look, you've got a very good receiving tight end with a very up-and-coming, promising pass offense in Seattle. And, hopefully those two can connect. But anyway, Continue with your evaluation, Russ.
Yeah, I like Ladarius. That's too high for me, but I understand it.
I don't know, man. I am all. I mean, I'm sort of a Pittsburgh homer when it comes to fantasy, anyway.
Mhm.
So you've got Martavis Bryant out for a year. You've got Heath Miller, obviously, who Ladarius Green's replacing. I'm like licking my chops at that, right? He could like be the number 2 target there in that offense.
He's in that same tier for me, but I think I would go Ertz, Ebron, Fleener over him. But
Okay.
they're all relatively the same for me.
Yeah.
Um, and then I guess I will mention you have Delaney Walker at 11. I love him as a value.
Yeah.
He's been getting it done the last 2 years, and I think he's just going to be one of those vet tight ends that gets it done again this year.
Yeah. So anything beyond 11, Russ, that you see that sticks out to you?
Not really. Yeah, I like pretty much where you have um Austin Safarian Jenkins 13, Gary Barnage 15, sorta Martellus Bennett 17, Max Williams 18. Those are kind of the guys I'm looking at in the middle rounds of dynasty startups. So
Yeah, I mean, look, those are the perfect sort of safety valves, if you will, as far as tight ends go. If you're in a one tight end dynasty or redraft league, even those guys as your primary backup to fill in case of injury or whatever, I think are, it's very little risk with those guys. There's very little to lose by picking those guys there. So. All right, Russ. Well, that was a good full show. Dynasty rankings are always fun to talk about because, everybody has one. So, but we will probably cover the draft on the next episode. As Russ said, it's a couple weeks away. So we'll look at the guys entering the league, where they could go, where they should go, and all that good stuff. But until then, this has been the Dynasty Slant. I'm Michael Moore. He's Russell Clay, and we will see you guys next time.